go ahead and try to get started and with our next section, which is going to be focused on green software. And so we'll be welcoming Annette, after asking you last night, I'm now going to mess it up, Annette Giardina to the stage. Annette is the Chief Innovation and Sustainability Officer at Avanade, and she works with clients across the spectrum of ESG agenda to help clients pivot more toward a sustainable use of technology to deliver goods. And we're going to let her rock on. All right, welcome to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and it's a real pleasure to be here today and to talk about this topic. And of course, my laptop has just used this time to shut itself down. So give me a second while I get it to come back on. Face recognition, it's a wonderful thing. There we go. So what we want to talk about today. Sorry, you couldn't write this. Hold on a second. What I'm going to talk to you about today is the Green Software Foundation. Now, there's quite a few folks that are going to be talking about this today, so I'm going to try to pivot around and talk around some of the topics. But where we wanted to start was reminding ourselves what the SDG definition is. So the United Nations definition of sustainability, which we've already mentioned today, meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future. So when we look at that original UN charter, what we want to think about is how as technologists, we can affect that change. And how we can affect it not only for our own organizations, but the end users of the software we create or the software we support. So one way is by affecting scope 1 through 3 emissions. But this can be difficult in our role because carbon emissions tends to be a bit bitty. And by bitty, what I mean is that it's not just one big change, but it's a succession of small incremental changes that affect the greater whole. And through that, we can make the change happen. But in a lot of organizations, that change is not thought about when it comes to technology. So technology acts as a bit of a blind spot. So I'm sure most of the people in this room know this already, but let's just remind ourselves of what scope 1 through 3 are. And essentially, what we're looking at is scope 1, which is that which we affect ourselves, scope 2, which is energy usage, and scope 3, which is our supply chain and the downstream products, both upstream and downstream in our chain. When we think of emissions, a lot of people, if we go back to the wonderful Guinness analogy, a lot of people tend to think of the scope 1 and the scope 2, but they don't necessarily think about the overall. So while scope 1 can be affected through what we do with green software because it allows us to control our own emissions, it also helps us reduce the electricity consumed in scope 2. We talked before about the fact that we're using water to cool data centers. It helps us reduce that. But it also affects the software that we write or the software that we use when it comes to our everyday processes, and therefore we affect scope 3 as well. So I'm going to, if we look at our favorite analogy of the day, we want to drain the pint of Guinness. So where we go from there is, if you think about why this matters, if you think about an iPhone, you think about how an iPhone is created, the vast majority of the carbon emission associated, carbon footprint associated with a mobile device is actually taken up in the manufacturing and supply chain. And unless you actually produce phones for a living, you can't really affect that. But what we can affect is the way the software works on that phone and the efficiency and the efficacy of the apps that we write that run on that phone. So what we want to think about is how we can either get better and more efficient use of the hardware through the use of the apps and the software we write, or how we can get more effective and efficient in the apps that we write so that we're making sure that we're using the least. So, and if you think about this, this really comes back to those emissions being bitty and being little pieces. It's not a supermassive chunk that's going to say, oops, here we go, we've solved the problem. But what it is going to do is it's going to let us have those impacts and have those incremental impacts that lead up to the overall change. So a couple of stats and statistics for you. Green software will make an impact. So if you look at greening the division of one large enterprise, it's been worked out that that's the equivalent of keeping 26,000 fossil-fueled cars off the road for 1 year. That's one division of one large enterprise, okay? Or you can look at how green software can actually reduce energy usage. Oh, it's done it again. Green software can help reduce energy usage by up to 65%. But probably more topically, and something we're more interested in right now, is the use of AI. So if you look at you look at AI and you look at the concept of you look at the concept of responsible AI, you need to think about how you're going to be doing that. So unoptimized deep learning models or large language models use outrageous computational power. They have a subsequent impact on the environment. So that computational cost typically has a linear relationship with data. So the more data we're using, the more cost it takes to compute. And as the example was used earlier this morning about taking 50 hours to compute versus 5 minutes, right? So we have the issues with the data, we have the issues with the training. And a lot of the state-of-the-art advances that are happening right now are focused on that. But it's also focused on bigger data sets. So if you think about ChatGPT, the latest version is consuming, I think, something like 70% of the internet. Now think of the computational power and the energy that's being drawn to do that consumption of data so that we can write little ditties about our company, right? Which is how you see most people demonstrate ChatGPT. But what we need to do is actually think about responsible AI, okay? And another little stat for you. The human brain requires about 20 watts of energy to operate, okay? And so if you equate that and you roll it out across a year, that's about 36,000 kilograms of CO2 that we generate in a year using our bodies and our brains. A large deep learning model consumes about 284,000 kilograms in a year. So that's 78 times the power of our brains that we're consuming. So when we're looking at responsible AI, and believe me, this is a topic we could spend days debating, but when we're looking at responsible AI, we have to think about when to use AI, how to use AI, and as technologists, when we're writing these models, when we're writing these algorithms, when we're creating these apps that use it, we have to think about how we're going to make that green. So all of this is relevant because as we talk about how we move forward with green software, we need to think about how digital actually can damage the environment and what we do to counteract that. So if you think about energy usage and CO2 emissions and resource depletion, it becomes very relevant. This morning on the news, they talked about this great thing that's happened. They've discovered a supervolcano that's extinct in the United States that has more lithium in it than anywhere else in the world, and now we can start mining it. And so part of me went, well, that's great, because we have lithium for batteries and batteries for electric cars. And then I thought about the strip mining that's going to be used and the degradation of the environment and all the pollutants that are going to be caused and those gigantic trucks that are going to be driving. And I thought, well, it's always a give and a take when it comes to the climate. So what we want to think about is, in technology, what does sustainability look like? Well, one is sustainable IT. So how can we measure the impact of that? One is the sustainable cloud, as we've talked about earlier. But what we really want to talk about right now is sustainable software. So how can we improve the sustainability of the software ecosystem through awareness, maturity assessment, and benchmarking? And the Green Software Foundation is at the heart of that, because the Green Software Foundation gives us that trusted ecosystem, the standards, the SDK, and the patterns that we can all use to have a greener software. So the Green Software Foundation was established by a whole group of companies, one of which is my company, Avanade. And it was established as a nonprofit to build that trusted ecosystem. And we have a couple folks talking about green software today, so that will be really helpful, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. But why did we need a foundation to do this? We needed a foundation because it's really hard for individuals to affect change on their own. And I really do need this to stop doing this to me. It's really hard to affect change on their own. And when you're trying to affect change on your own, it's really hard to make a difference, especially if you're talking about something that nobody understands, right? So you then think about, well, you've got big organizations, but they operate at a macro. So what you actually need is you need something that allows you to give individuals the ability to make impact in their everyday lives. And as technologists, our everyday lives is writing more efficient and more effective code. So how can we make sure that we're doing that and we're helping that to drive forward? So the Green Software Foundation establishes 5 principles. So standards, policy, community, champions, and open source. And we're not going to talk about all 5 of those today because it would take way too long, and we've got lots of people talking about this topic. So what we're going to really talk about a little bit today is standards, and then Gadu's going to be speaking in an hour or so, and he's going to go into that just a little bit more. But what I want to talk about first is the software carbon intensity specification. And this is really at the core of the Green Software Foundation, because it helps our developers make informed choices around tools, the architectures, and the services that they use. But it's designed for everyone as a usable standard, and this is really important, is it's designed to be ultimately usable. And it is also not designed about saying you must reduce by this target, because it recognizes that every organization and every application and every software platform is going to have a different set of targets that they need to comply with. So what it's really focused on is reduction. So how do we reduce what we're doing today? And if we can keep focusing on reduction, we can keep draining that pint of Guinness. So what it helps us also do is look at how we can use it. So we can use it when we write or use software. We can use it when we're measuring carbon impact of the software and the hardware that we're using, and then we can take action. So you can do that through focusing on energy efficiency, or focusing on hardware efficiency, or focusing on carbon awareness. So I'll talk about a couple of these topics. So the first is we have 8 principles supporting green software. And what these 8 principles are really about is how can we write better, more compact, more effective and efficient code that will have a lower carbon impact overall. And it looks about how we can use demand shifting or shaping and energy proportionality to make that more effective and more efficient. And importantly, it looks about we both measure and optimize what we're writing and what we're doing so that we're continually driving that reduction and we can increase overall carbon efficiency. So when we look back at that, one of the things that we have is we have the Green Software Foundation certifications. Now, if you are not already Green Software Foundation certified, I'd hope most of the people in this room are, but if you are not, I'd really encourage you to get yourself certified, figure out a way to encourage your teams to get certified. So for instance, within my organization, even though we have a lot of people green certified, what we're doing is we're kicking off a competition of our teams to see who can get the most people Green Software Foundation certified by COP28. Right, so we're going to be kicking that off next week, and we'll be pushing that out to our entire organization. And what's really important was when we were building out the competition, one of the ladies who runs our resourcing team went, I'm interested in this, and she went off and she got herself Green Software Foundation certified. Now, Kay is never going to write a piece of code. But the fact is she took the time to learn and understand the principles, and now she can talk about it. And if we talk about things, we help drive change. But importantly, what we want to think about is this has been designed, especially the foundation training, that you don't have to be an engineer to do this training. And that's really important because if you think about it, when we're writing code, most of the efficiencies that we drive into code comes from our design. If our designers are trained and our designers understand green principles and our designers are following those green principles, then we write better code. So it's really great that it's there and it's available for everyone. And then what I also want to talk about is the Carbon Aware SDK. So carbon awareness is an important component. It's one of those 8 principles, and it's an important component of Green Software Foundation. And what it's focused on is essentially doing more processing when the electricity is cleaner. So how do we focus that? So we're doing more work when the electricity is cleaner and less work when the electricity is dirty. So cleanliness is essentially being determined by the carbon intensity of the electricity used. So if you think about green energy, so solar panels or water-fueled energy, et cetera, that's going to have less carbon intensity than something that's burning coal to produce electricity, right? So what we want to do is look at how we can get that from renewable sources and how we can get that intensity down. So how do we apply in practice? Well, there's 2 main methods for incorporating carbon awareness into what we do. The first is time shifting, which basically means we're shifting jobs that we're running throughout the day that might be compute heavy to times when the energy is cleaner on the grid. So we're making that choice and we're running those jobs at that point in time. The other one is location shifting, where we're actually saying it's greener for us to run out of this cloud located in this country than it is for us to run out of this cloud located in that country. So you can location shift, but there's a big caution on location shifting. And that caution is this: it may cost more compute power to transfer the data from cloud A to cloud B to run that time-shifted process than you actually gain. So as with all things with sustainability, it's always a trade-off. So you have to make that call quite carefully. So when we think about back to our iPhone example at the start, within Avanade, we've written 2 specifications that allow you to do more when the energy is clean. So when you go into your phone, you can actually say, I want to charge my phone when it's clean energy. And I can do the same on my laptop. I can say my Windows updates only get processed when the energy is clean. Now, these are 2 small changes, but those are 2 small changes that affect the whole, which is what the Green Software Foundation is all about. And in an ideal world, what we want to do is be able to provide tools for carbon mitigation at every single part of this software lifecycle. And as open source, we should be able to help create those tools and create those patterns. And that's another great thing about the Green Software Foundation. Any of us can contribute patterns to the foundation. Those patterns will be vetted, and if they're approved, they'll be released, and then anybody can use them, thus continuing on our drive for open source functionality. So in summary, a recap and a call to arms. Why green? We talked about it before, right? Greening one department in one large enterprise is the equivalent of 26,000 cars off the road in a year. And it's an area of sustainability overall that doesn't get enough focus. And we can change that. The Green Software Foundation is working to create the standards, the training, and the tooling. And it ensures that software has that zero environmental impact. One thing I'd also add here, because some folks have been talking about CSRD, whether it's CSRD or whether it's going to be the new SDS that's coming out in the UK, almost every organization we work for or with is going to be affected by it. And as part of that, you're going to have to look at double materiality of every single aspect. And that double materiality is quite often going to be impacted in these areas. So you need to be thinking now about not only how are you going to track that, but how are you going to reduce that, okay? And as we said before, if you aren't green certified, software certified, get it done. It's great. It helps. And then once you've gotten it done, amplify your certification. Talk about it on LinkedIn. Talk about it on social channels so that other people go, oh, actually, that sounds interesting. I'm going to try to do that as well. And then finally, put your action put everything you've learned into action on your own projects. And with that, I will say thank you.